Barbara Marr was perhaps the ultimate Hollywood vamp. She cut a swathe through Hollywood's glamorous nightlife, through the beds of powerful men, and of course across the silver screen. She was known for her dark, mysterious beauty. So beautiful, in fact, that bizarrely she was once arrested for being too beautiful. But no matter how brightly her image flickered on movie theater screens across the world, it seemed like darkness stalked Barbara throughout her life, and that darkness would finally consume her completely. "I cheat nature," she would say. "I never sleep more than 2 hours a day. I have better things to do." But as we will see, nature can't be cheated. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. Retha Dale Watson was born on July 28, 1896, in Yakima, Washington, to parents William Wright and Rose Watson, along with her biological brother, William Watson Jr. Barbara Marr, as she would later rename herself, also had 2 half-siblings, Henry and Violet, from her mother's previous marriage. From a young age, Barbara showed a knack for the performing arts. She debuted professionally in a stage production of Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1904. As she matured, her talents in acting and dancing blossomed, as did her striking looks, which turned plenty of heads by her teenage years. The Watson family moved from Washington to Fresno, California, and eventually settled in Burbank. But in truth, settled is a word that could only ever be loosely applied to Barbara's tumultuous life. Barbara's first brush with public scandal happened in 1913, when she was 16 years old. Her half-sister Violet and Violet's friend, C.C. Boxley, were accused of kidnapping her. Barbara explained that during a drive that went from the San Fernando Valley to Santa Barbara, she realized their plan was to take her to San Francisco against her will. Fearing for her own safety, she chose not to resist or attempt to escape. After hearing of their daughter's predicament, her parents in Burbank contacted the police, leading to warrants issued against Violet and Boxley. The alleged kidnappers gave Barbara money to return to Los Angeles, coaching her on what to tell the authorities to avoid legal trouble before they continued their journey north. It was an early sign of the kind of negative forces that Barbara would attract in her adult life, and of a strange compulsion that many felt to try and possess her, something which she always resisted. Back in Los Angeles, Barbara became well known in the local nightlife scene, dancing professionally and doing bit parts in films. Her parents, worried about the potential dangers of such a lifestyle, moved to El Centro, California, but Barbara found adventure and risk irresistible. During a visit to Yuma, Arizona, she met rancher Jack Lytle. The attraction was mutual and intense, leading Barbara to marry him. Their marriage was short-lived. Barbara returned to Los Angeles claiming to be a widow, saying Lytle had succumbed to pneumonia. Her nights were spent back in the world of the night, dancing and socializing, mourning her loss in the company of various shady admirers. This behavior eventually drew the attention of juvenile authorities, who were apparently concerned about her well-being in the city alone, especially given her striking beauty. So they arrested the 16-year-old. When asked what the charges were, the officers offered this unusual response: "There is no charge against Miss Watson, unless it be that she is dangerously beautiful," remarked the chief juvenile officer. "She is such an attractive girl that men follow her about. We found her at the Rockwood Apartments. We investigated and found that everything was satisfactory. There is, however, a constant danger hanging over girls who are alone in a city." Once again, Barbara, like a phantom of the night, could not be pinned down so easily. Faced with the dilemma of how to ensure her safety, officials reached out to her parents in El Centro, who requested that Barbara be sent back to them. Seizing this opportunity, we told her she could choose between returning voluntarily to her parents, and thus keep away from the white lights of the city, and being a ward of the juvenile court, the officer explained. He continued, "She decided to return to her parents. We believe that despite the oddity of threatening to arrest a girl because she is beautiful, we are taking the right steps. We would rather find her guilty of being beautiful than anything else. Barbara's time in El Centro didn't last long. By June 1914, she had married Lawrence Converse, and they celebrated their union in San Francisco. However, back in Los Angeles, an Amelia Converse claimed that she was the true Mrs. Converse, reporting her husband had become unstable due to past injuries sustained in a Mexican prison. San Francisco's authorities were on the lookout for Converse to arrest him on charges of bigamy. Upon turning himself in, Converse claimed drug and alcohol-induced amnesia about marrying Barbara. Barbara countered, "Lawrence was both sane and sober when I married him. If he had not been, the minister would not have married us." The dilemma of Converse's dual marriages resolved itself weeks later, when he succumbed to a cerebral hemorrhage. As this was going on, Barbara had begun to make her first screen appearances in a few minor one-reelers. But shortly after the situation with Converse, Barbara found herself banned from film studios, with her off-screen adventures becoming too scandalous for the studio bosses to contemplate. Barbara was well aware of how hypnotic and dangerous her beauty was. She said, "The managers say perhaps when people have forgotten that my beauty made Lawrence Converse forget that he was married, despite the fact that he had a wife and 3 children, and also when the public has ceased to think about some other matters, which have caused my name to be printed in the papers, then I can get back to work." Despite the scandalous headlines and hesitant studio executives, Barbara didn't remain sidelined for long, and quickly resumed her acting career. During the production of a short Western film, she finally transformed into Barbara Marr. During the shoot, the lead, a Miss Marr, fell off a horse and was injured. Barbara was hanging around and someone asked her if she could ride a horse. "Oh, sure," was her reply. And so she got on the horse and became Miss Lamar, in honor of the woman she had just usurped. But just when it seemed she was on the up, the studio suddenly went cold on her again. So in 1915, sensing that the gossip might be hampering her career in films, Barbara headed to San Francisco. There, she teamed up with Robert Carville to form a dance duo, quickly becoming the toast of the town in venues like Old Faithful Inn and Kissack's Saddle Rock. She danced at the San Francisco World's Fair of 1915 and headed to venues in Chicago, New York, and other cities. She caught the eye of a newspaper tycoon, William Randolph Hearst, who ran a series of articles on her in his papers. She danced with the likes of Rudolph Valentino and Clifton Webb, but Carville was her main partner. While many anticipated a wedding, Barbara's eyes were apparently set on Phil Ainsworth, a well-known musical comedy actor and dancer. She soon partnered with Ainsworth on the dance floor, and they were married within a month, though their happiness was, once again, fleeting. Just 2 days post-marriage, Ainsworth was arrested for illegally selling a car, a vehicle actually owned by none other than Robert Carville. Barbara had informed Ainsworth about a car which was supposedly hers, that was parked in Oakland. After selling the car for quick cash, Carville, feeling betrayed over losing his dance partner, pushed for Ainsworth's arrest. Court testimonials later suggested that Barbara had in fact been in love with Carville, who preferred that their connection remain strictly professional. This complicated case against Ainsworth was eventually dismissed, but the new marriage was already in trouble. In June 1918, Ainsworth filed for divorce, naming Carville in the suit. Shortly after, rumors swirled that Barbara had died from a broken back after some unspecified accident. Yet she was discovered alive, working a hotel grill in Salt Lake City. This then led some to speculate that she had spread the rumor herself to derail Ainsworth's legal action. The divorce proceedings pressed on regardless. Once free from Ainsworth, Barbara embarked on a vaudeville circuit that led her across the United States. Here she got the eye of Nicholas Bernard Dealey, an actor 18 years her senior, who proposed swiftly. Barbara disclosed her ongoing divorce from Ainsworth, prompting Dealey to advise her to secure divorce independently, which would undermine any of Ainsworth's claims. They paused in Chicago just long enough for her to finalize her divorce. In September 1918, Barbara tied the knot with Ben Dealey. Despite the gap in their ages, they found common ground in their love for literature, art, and writing, not to mention their fondness for hard drinking. They settled into life at the Hotel Pontiac in Manhattan. where Barbara devoted much of her time to writing stories she dreamt of turning into films. If she was blacklisted from acting, then she'd ride back into Hollywood as a screenwriter or director. By the end of 1919, the Dealys decided to try their luck in Los Angeles, hoping to get Barbara's screenplays noticed, and the studios were enthusiastic about her work. She quickly made a mark at Fox, and then at United Artists, contributing scripts for The Mother of His Children, Rose of Nome, The Little Gray Mouse, The Land of Jazz, and Flame of Youth, all of which were brought to life in 1920. As Barbara was making strides behind the camera, Dealey found himself landing supporting roles in movies like Flames of the Flesh in 1919 and Molly O a couple of years later. However, it wasn't particularly shocking to those around them when tensions flared up between the couple. Upon their inevitable separation, Dealey expressed that life with Barbara, whom he described as too beautiful, had been overwhelming. He accused Barbara of bringing her parents to live with them, conspiring to tempt him into infidelity, among other allegations including incessant smoking, temper outbursts, and threats against his life. He even alleged that she'd pulled the same old stunt as before and had him falsely arrested for auto theft. Barbara countered with accusations of her own, claiming Dealey harassed and embarrassed her, wasted her earnings, and was unfaithful. Despite the heap of mutual grievances, the pair eventually reconciled. In 1920, Louis B. Mayer enticed Barbara back to the screen with a minor role in Harriet and the Piper, starring Anita Stewart. It was none other than Mary Pickford who pointed out that Barbara's striking beauty was too mesmerizing for off-screen roles alone. She spotted Barbara typing away in the United Artists writing room and tapped her on the shoulder, saying, "My dear, you are too beautiful to be behind a camera. Your vibrant magnetism should be shared by film audiences." Douglas Fairbanks then cast her as a seductress in The Nut in 1921, leading to more significant roles, including Milady de Winter in The Three Musketeers that same year. This was a role that boosted her profile in a big way. She'd risen, fallen, and made a comeback with brainpower alone, and now was about to become a star. As Barbara's career flourished, her marriage to Dealey unraveled once and for all, prompting his return to New York. Meanwhile, Barbara maintained a public persona that for once was unencumbered by marital ties, although she did have a liaison with the impeccably suave John Gilbert during and after The Three Musketeers. We'll be coming back to Gilbert in a future episode, all about the short but astonishing life of the man known as the Great Lover. Meanwhile, during this period, Barbara met Paul Byrne at Gilbert's Beverly Hills home. The tragic Byrne was believed by many to be her greatest love. The relationship spanned from late 1921 through most of 1922, evolving into a lifelong friendship. Barbara's star was firmly established when Rex Ingram cast her alongside the debuting Ramon Samaniegos in The Prisoner of Zenda in 1922, which turned out to be a major hit. Samaniegos would later become the legendary Ramon Navarro. Her co-star Alice Terry, reflecting on their time together during the film, admitted to initial envy of Barbara Lamar's beauty, but grew to appreciate her kind nature, saying, "She was as lovely in her personality as she was in her ravishing looks." In the latter part of 1921, while working on The Prisoner of Zenda, Barbara found out she was expecting. The father of her son, Marvin Carville Lamar, remains a mystery to this day. Barbara would not even tell her closest friends which one of her lovers she believed to be the father, and Marvin, later adopted and known as Donald Michael Gallery, would never know who his biological father was. The following year, she and Navarro were brought back together by Rex Ingram for Trifling Women. Barbara quickly became a familiar face on movie magazine covers globally. Her weekly earnings reportedly jumped to $6,500, making her one of the cinema's biggest stars. She also acquired her nickname, the girl who was too beautiful. Adela Rogers St. John's, a decade-long acquaintance of Barbara's from her days as Retha Watson, spotlighted her in photoplay in June 1922. St. John's remarked, "Barbara Lamar's face at 15, when I first knew her, was the kind that could no more go peacefully through a world of men then a cobblestone could pass through a plate glass window without busting things up. To St. John's, Barbara's rise from challenging beginnings to Hollywood stardom was a victory for all women. I am willing to salute the unconquerable soul of a girl who can beat her own destiny. As women, we ought to be very proud of Barbara Marr. It seemed that Marr's nightclub lifestyle would be incompatible with the challenges of motherhood, but that didn't mean she did not love Marvin. Her son gave his thoughts many years later, saying, "She thought, I can love Marvin and he will love me unconditionally." And that's something she didn't get from the men she married. The men she married were screwy, but this time she would raise me, and I would love her no matter what. That said, Barbara temporarily placed Marvin with close friends, as she considered a more permanent arrangement for him, meanwhile concentrating on her career and her ever-evolving love life. "I take my lovers like roses, by the dozen," she would often say. In 1922, she also starred alongside Lon Chaney, Blanche Sweet, and Louis Fazenda in Quincy Adams' Sawyer, and then filmed The Hero and Poor Men's Wives simultaneously. The Hero earned her accolades for her performance, with Variety noting, "She was everything that anyone could have wanted on the screen, and off of it. She managed to put over some very emotional stuff without overacting it." In Poor Men's Wives, shot during nighttime after her daytime shoots for The Hero, Barbara swapped her luxurious wardrobe for simpler attire, embodying the role of a taxi driver's wife to critical acclaim. Her cab-driving co-star, David Butler, fondly remembered Barbara Marr, mentioning, "I had a Buick automobile, and she didn't have a car, so I used to drive her home every night." During these times, Paul Byrne, evidently still lovelorn, would often arrive with roses. She explained, "The bell would ring and he'd be there with his bunch of roses, and I'd go out the back way." While working on Poor Men's Wives, Barbara struck up a friendship with fellow actress Zazu Pitts. This role offered moviegoers a new perspective on Barbara Marr, beyond her typical portrayal of a glamorous vamp. She showed her versatility in a more down-to-earth role, and demonstrated her talent as a writer, capable of bringing her own narratives to the big screen. Her complex history, marked by numerous marriages, intrigued her audience. They were eager to uncover the essence of Barbara Marr, to look beyond the sensational headlines, and to discover the genuine person beneath her enigmatic charm. So Barbara made an effort to be more open. After having lunch with her, Los Angeles Times journalist William Foster Elliott described her as, to quote, "the most natural person imaginable. The impression that came away with me was not one of a strange exotic, a woman with a past, a vamp with a string of scalps at her belt. She is remarkably straightforward and man-to-man in her attitude," he observed. Barbara explained to Elliot, "I enjoy every bit of life. I want to get all I can out of every minute of it. There are two things I can't endure: stupidity and insincerity. I am sick of men who say the expected thing at the right time, and of pictures that end with the assumption that someone lives happily ever after. Routine compliments are the stupidest things in the world. If people do live happily ever after, they should be shown doing it, so that others will know how it's done. Because I have these complexes, my ambition is awfully simple and awfully difficult. I want to play a woman for once as a woman really feels and acts, not as, according to the conventions, how she is supposed to act." She then gave another candid interview to Willis Goldbeck of Motion Picture Magazine. This time she revealed how her moments of darkness motivated her art. "When I am happy, I am like a cat, sleek and purring, quite useless. It is when I'm unhappy, with an ache perhaps in my heart, that I do my finest work." However, Barbara's journey in fame and life took a downturn while filming Souls for Sale in 1923. She was back in her regular role, only it was an early example of meta-cinema, as she was playing a fictional vamp Hollywood star in a behind-the-scenes film. A dance sequence led to a sprained ankle, and to keep production moving and Barbara on set, studio doctors administered morphine and cocaine. Unfortunately, by the end of the production, Barbara, with her susceptibility to addiction, found herself struggling with dependency. Barbara Lamar's lifestyle, marked by her nightlife indulgence, tendency to crash dieting, and heavy drinking, was now about to be ravaged by drug addiction. When her baby was around 6 months old, Barbara orchestrated a plan to officially adopt her biological son. In February 1923, while making personal appearances in Texas, she utilized this trip as a cover for her real intentions. Unbeknownst to the attendees of the Southwest Auto Show and Food and Home Exposition in Dallas and San Antonio, the plan, cooked up with her close friend Virginia Carville and her manager A.L. Sawyer, involved a staged adoption from a Dallas orphanage, Hope Cottage. Her son later provided details about the adoption, revealing there was a druggist with the last name of Marvin who owned a lot of drugstores in Dallas. He arranged for Barbara to use a local orphanage, Hope Cottage, in Dallas for the adoption. That's how I got my first name, Marvin. The adoption documents listed the last name of Barbara's friend, Virginia Carville, as his surname. Barbara then concocted a story for the press, claiming she chose Marvin from among 60 other orphans based on an instant connection. He smiled and gurgled, and I smiled, and that was all, she said. I didn't have any idea of adopting a baby when I went there, but something about him just made me pick him up, and then I couldn't bear to go away without him. So that very afternoon, I cut through all the red tape and adopted him. She also misled reporters with 2 fabricated stories about her own past, stating, I was a foster child myself, so I know what it means to feel that there is no one in all the world that belongs to you. Upon her return to Hollywood, Barbara shared her thoughts on adoption and photoplay, saying, I adopted a baby because I wanted something to love, and the only thing I found in this world that is at all satisfactory to love is a baby. I took this little trusting man-child because my heart was empty and my soul needed an altar upon which to sacrifice. While back in Hollywood, Barbara and John Gilbert rekindled their relationship on the set of St. Elmo. Latrice Joy, Gilbert's wife at the time, shared a late-night anecdote. That night, the phone rang at about 2 in the morning. I answered it, and it was Barbara Lamar. She said, Oh, Latrice, darling, may I speak to Jack, please? I said, Of course, dear, and then threw the phone under the bed and went back to sleep. Fred Niblo, the director behind Barbara's standout film, The Three Musketeers, led her again in Strangers of the Night. In this movie, she was portraying a woman who reignites a spark in a monotonous marriage, a role quite far from her own tumultuous real-life experience. During this project, Barbara continued to work through her personal romantic complications. She had been seeing Virgil Jack Dougherty intermittently for more than a year, and he was eagerly proposing marriage. Barbara entertained the idea but kept her words vague to Dougherty. Come spring 1923, as their relationship deepened, Barbara had to get rid of one husband before embracing yet another. Though she had initiated divorce proceedings against Ben Dealey, she had promptly retracted the petition, opting for separation instead. Barbara had 2 primary concerns. She worried about Dealey inheriting half of her estate per Californian law, should she pass away suddenly. She wanted to secure a future for young Marvin. Additionally, it was revealed that her quickie divorce in Illinois from Phil Ainsworth in 1918 was invalid, rendering her subsequent marriage to Dealey potentially bigamous and her divorce efforts possibly fraudulent. A judge in Cook County, Illinois, resolved these matters by annulling the marriage to Dealey and dismissing any charges of fraud due to the statute of limitations. However, Dealey later sued Barbara for statutory adultery, alleging she was cohabiting with Dougherty. But Lamar was determined to press on with her marriage plans, in spite of Dealey's attempts to thwart her. Resuming her role in Strangers of the Night, Barbara Lamar's work week was paused for a special weekend trip. She, Jack Dougherty, and her parents headed to Ventura. In a quiet ceremony at the First Congregational Church's parsonage, Barbara exchanged vows with Dougherty, turning a new chapter as Mrs. Dougherty. Paul Byrne played the role of the best man. I made up my mind to marry Jack someday, Barbara explained to the press. But at noon today, I had no more idea of marrying him than of marrying you. Then, I just decided. Come Monday, Barbara was back on set, while Dougherty returned to his own acting duties at Universal. But it wouldn't be long before Barbara found herself entangled in yet another divorce drama. Not her own this time, but in cameraman Oscar Marriott's split from his wife. Oscar had written letters suggesting he and Barbara were locked into a passionate love affair. Together, Barbara and her husband countered the allegations. I have some right to happiness, and these continuous slanders are making a nightmare of my life, Barbara expressed. As it turned out, Marriott later admitted in court that he had fabricated the whole romance with Barbara as a means of getting his divorce. Amid the turmoil of the Marriott divorce saga, Barbara and Dougherty set off for Europe on June 6, 1923. They enjoyed their honeymoon in Paris before Barbara began working on her upcoming film, The Eternal City, which was shot in Rome. Meanwhile, little Marvin was looked after by family and friends. The Eternal City is distinguished as one of the earliest Hollywood movies to be filmed overseas. It showcased iconic Roman landmarks, like the Colosseum, the Forum, the Roman Baths, and the Appian Way. One notorious figure was particularly enamored with the vamp that had just shown up in Rome, all the way from California, the newly self-appointed Duce himself, Benito Mussolini. Fascinated by Barbara's stunning beauty, the Italian premier offered the support of the military for the film's production, and even made a brief cameo in the movie, standing on a palace balcony. The list of Hollywood films featuring walk-on parts played by infamous dictators is not very long, to say the least, but The Eternal City ranks among them. During her stay in Italy, the Los Angeles Times covered a story about Barbara adopting an Italian child. Apparently, the paperwork was partially completed, but for some reason the boy remained in Italy when Barbara returned to the United States, and that paper trail was lost along with many other archives during the destructive events of World War II. The Eternal City not only showcased Rome's historic sites, but also garnered attention for Barbara. Critics lauded Barbara La Marr as a vision of loveliness in her role of Donna Roma in The Eternal City. She is one of the most beautiful women of the cinema, and let her but once flicker across the screen, and it becomes instantly vital with beauty and glamour. Upon her return to the U.S., Barbara's star status was now undeniable. In New York, briefly, she inked a deal with Associated Pictures before heading to Los Angeles, where a welcoming committee awaited, including Ramon Navarro and her son Marvin. She eagerly brushed past the crowd to reunite with Marvin, her top priority amidst all the fanfare. Barbara La Marr and Ramon Navarro had been tight-knit friends for years, with Navarro stepping in to assist her in battling her escalating dependencies on alcohol and narcotics. Post-filming Thy Name is Woman, Barbara told Navarro he would become a major star. However, when he reciprocated the sentiment, she somberly forecasted, "Oh no, in 2 years I will be forgotten." Film critic Lamar Lane praised Thy Name is Woman in Photoplay as a standout film of the year, picking out Barbara's on-screen presence. She wrote, "No more fascinating figure has ever been viewed on the screen than that presented by Barbara La Marr as the wife of the old smuggler. She is a revelation of beauty and artistry, and she does it all without the aid of fine feathers." Harrison's reports also applauded Barbara's performance as one of her finest, while the New York Times gave a mixed review, praising her effectiveness in several scenes despite occasional exaggerated expressions. In her 1924 movie, The Shooting of Dan McGrew, Barbara portrayed a dancer who abandons her family for a new life in New York, promised by another suitor. The plot thickens as she becomes entangled in a sordid life in Alaska, until her husband, in a dramatic climax, finds her and seeks vengeance on the man who disrupted their lives, ultimately bringing his family back together. However, Harrison's reports cautioned that her explicit display of allure might not sit well with all viewers, suggesting it could be seen as offensive by some. As they put it, Barbara La Marr's obvious parading of her physical charms might prove not only distasteful, but disgusting to the family circle. Barbara herself harbored regrets about her involvement in the film, particularly her character's profession as a quasi-prostitute. Her son revealed that Barbara was so distressed by her role that she never watched the movie, and wished to shield him from it as well. Transitioning from Metro to First National offered Barbara a fresh start among stars like Colleen Moore and Norma Talmadge. The onset of 1924 seemed promising, marking a period of personal stability and a career peak for Barbara. Nonetheless, this year also signaled the beginning of her personal and health-related struggles. As Barbara Marr continued to star in films, the toll of her increased substance abuse started to manifest physically. Her marriage disintegrated, and throughout 1924 she found herself entangled in legal battles that threatened to unveil her tumultuous private life. The year was rife with sensational headlines, putting her movies at risk of being banned. In late 1923, during the production of The Shooting of Dan McGrew, attorney Herman L. Roth was accused of trying to extort $400 from Barbara, a fraction of the $20,000 he demanded to withhold a complaint that would embroil her further in her divorce proceedings with Bernard Dealey. Roth's threats included revealing a supposed affair between Barbara and her manager, Arthur Sawyer, and allegations of her renting a secluded place in Hollywood for her secret love affairs. Barbara countered these claims in court, asserting she and Dealey were never officially married, and denying any improper associations outside of her marriage. By early 1924, with the trial against Roth in motion, Barbara embarked on The White Moth, inspired by one of her own poems and directed by Maurice Tourneur. The film depicted a world-wise man attempting to save his brother from a Parisian dancer's clutches, played by Barbara. Co-star Ben Lyon found himself fascinated by Barbara, though his feelings were unreciprocated. Once again, Barbara was forced to issue public denials regarding any romantic link between them. Critics were harsh on The White Moth, with Harrison's reports criticizing its explicit content. By now, Harrison's reports were finding plenty of market traction in condemning the supposed immoral nature of various films. And like any good rag, they knew how to pick a target and run them down at every opportunity. Barbara was becoming their number one enemy of public morals, and they dismissed her passion project as a sex drama. They wrote, "The introduction of such coarseness into a picture adds nothing to it, and takes away much." Variety on this occasion were equally sniffy, even questioning whether the current laws were strict enough regarding the amount of female flesh permissible on screen. In the middle of February, Barbara was on the witness stand testifying in the extortion case against Roth. During the trial, Barbara's emotional testimony regarding her alleged marriages captivated the courtroom. When presented with accusations of liaisons with multiple men, including the disgraced Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, her emotional distress was evident. Herman L. Roth was convicted of extortion and received a sentence of 1 to 5 years in San Quentin prison. This legal victory was a slight relief for Marr, yet the emotional toll nudged her further and towards her limits. Shortly after The White Moth, she embarked on Sandra, playing a conflicted woman entangled in an affair, seeking a thrill beyond her marital life. The character contemplates ending her life but finds redemption in a serendipitous reunion with her husband, played by Burt Littell. Despite years of substance abuse, Barbara managed to maintain her striking appearance. However, her ongoing struggles with weight, countered by extreme dieting and cocaine use, became evident during Sandra, as the camera started to capture the toll her lifestyle was taking on her. By April 1924, Barbara was at the forefront of a promotional tour across the country, endorsing Southern California tourism. The decision to choose Barbara as the face of Southern California fired up yet more controversy, given her recent legal and personal scandals, including her multiple marriages and her lifestyle. Alma Whitaker of the Los Angeles Times got her claws out for Barbara in an article, writing, "Wasn't she rather a peculiarly notorious little girl in the city before she became worth $15,000 a year? Weren't the recent revelations about her 5 marriages, brought out in a recent court trial, a bit staggering, even in these days? Wasn't she rather quaintly vague about these various hasty and embarrassing adventures? Actually, this is a peculiarly tactless affront to the women of Southern California. If the men want to be represented by Barbara Marr, I am sure the women don't." The Women's Council in Sacramento responded by recommending a ban on Barbara's films in local cinemas, citing potential negative influences on young moviegoers. This time they honed in on an interview Barbara had given in the past, where she said, to quote, "A woman must be immoral in order to be a movie vamp." Amidst the storm of negative press, Barbara found herself embroiled in another scandal involving Miguel Escoto. Escoto claimed to be a Spanish count and aspired to fame in Hollywood under the name Mario Escobar. Bizarrely, an inmate at the Los Angeles County Jail claimed to have seen Escoto involved in a violent dispute over Barbara, alleging that the altercation led to Escoto's death, and even provided details on where the body could be found. The authorities launched a search for the aspiring actor's cadaver along the coastline near San Juan Capistrano. Barbara, for her part, firmly refuted any connection with Escoto. Nevertheless, the police were able to find Escoto, who recounted his romantic dalliances with Barbara since they met on a journey from San Francisco to Los Angeles. He also asserted that since their meeting, he had been the victim of 2 unexplained violent beatings. By late 1924, the marriage between Barbara Marr and Jack Dougherty was faltering. To the surprise of precisely no one, Dougherty attributed their marital discord to Barbara's fame. He was not happy at being known primarily as Mr. Barbara Marr. In an article for Photoplay, Dougherty said he thought that their marriage could have been a happy one if Barbara hadn't ascended to stardom. He observed that Barbara's celebrity status attracted a circle of yes men who shielded her from the realities of her deteriorating health and lifestyle. "Now, I think Barbara is wonderful and glamorous too," he admitted, "but I know she isn't perfect. I had to sit by and hear them flatter and stretch the truth every minute of the day, and in order to counteract that, in order to help her keep her head and her feet firmly planted in reality, I often had to remind her of her failings, or to argue against these people, and that isn't a happy situation for a man who loves a woman. He doesn't want to appear to his loved one as a policeman always warning her against dangers." Tired of the endless controversies, Barbara headed east with her son Marvin to shoot The Heart of a Siren. During this time, her casual liaison with co-star Ben Finney evolved into a serious relationship. Dougherty, having just visited Barbara in New York, learned of her new romantic entanglement. Declaring his ongoing affection for Barbara despite their separation, Dougherty rather graciously expressed his willingness to support her happiness. After completing The Heart of a Siren, Barbara stayed in New York to work on The White Monkey, another drama centered around marital betrayal. Unfortunately, neither film resonated with audiences or critics. The Heart of a Siren was criticized for Barbara's performance. The White Monkey received similarly tepid responses, described by the New York Times as being like warm champagne. Following her stint in New York, First National summoned Barbara back to Hollywood for The Girl from Montmartre. At this point, Barbara's physical condition had noticeably deteriorated. This was initially dismissed by the media as a throat infection and some intestinal trouble, but by now she weighed less than 100 pounds and looked seriously ill. Despite her health challenges, Barbara engaged with the press, expressing optimism for her latest project as a big comeback after 3 dud pictures. "If my next picture is no good, I will simply be kicked off the screen, and it would be so much nicer to retire gracefully," Barbara declared. Her recovery was sluggish. She managed only a few hours of work daily, leaning on a cane and accompanied by her nurse when she arrived on set. During shooting in October, Barbara collapsed on set and needed to be carried away for rest. Doctors advised a hiatus until she could gather her strength back. After some rest, Barbara made her return to the studio, shouting to the scrum of reporters flocking around her at the studio gates, "Tell everybody I'm getting along fine." However, her condition prevented her from completing the film. A look-alike actress, Lolita Lee, was brought in to finish Barbara's scenes. Barbara then secluded herself in her Altadena house, away from the limelight, fighting for her life with only her parents by her side. Marvin was cared for by Barbara's friend, Zazu Pitts. The media buzzed with speculations about Barbara's deteriorating health. As Barbara valiantly battled her illness, one writer prematurely mourned her. "Barbara is making a brave stand against the Reaper. Doctors say that the end is near. Her voice is gone, her body wasted to 80 pounds. Miss Marr fights on, but a hopeless fight, the physicians declare, reported Daisy Dean in her near obituary. Cal York and Photoplay encouraged fans to support Barbara's fight for life, if there was to be any hope of her returning to the screen. The Los Angeles Times published a photo of a frail Barbara in bed, still optimistic about her recovery. "Hello everybody, I'm getting better. I'll be all right pretty soon. It gets awfully tiresome sometimes, but I'll be all right." By late November, Barbara showed improvement, gaining weight and receiving visitors on good days. During a moment of clarity, Barbara asked Zazu Pitts to take care of Marvin if she didn't survive, giving her $100,000 for his upbringing. Despite a brief recovery, Barbara's condition worsened by late January 1926, leading to her passing on January 30th. Initial reports cited vague terms like broken nerves and complications as the cause of death. Paul Byrne intervened against the cremation of Barbara, giving a strict order to her father stating, "Too beautiful to cremate." Barbara's fans, around 40,000 in number, paid their respects as she lay in state at the Walter C. Blue Funeral Home. Her funeral, according to the rituals of Christian Science, was attended by only her closest associates and family. It saw notable figures like Claire Windsor and Ramon Navarro among the attendees. The funeral procession to Barbara's final resting place at Hollywood Cemetery, now Hollywood Forever, paused traffic for a full quarter of an hour. True to her promise, Zazu Pitts, alongside her husband Tom Gallery, took in little Marvin, renaming him Don Gallery. He seemingly had no further contact with Barbara's family after that. Her friend and writer Adela Rogers St. John said of her tragic friend, "Her beauty carried her to the very pinnacle. But sometimes knowing her as I did, I think it gave her none of the things her heart really longed for, and that the saddest thing about Barbara Lamar was not her death, but her swift, hot, violent life that preyed vampire-like upon her beauty and allowed so much of her genius and womanliness to waste." That's all from Hollywood Mysteries. Sweet dreams.